Hi everyone and welcome to this Fantasy Fellowship video. My name is Sarah and joining me today for a very exciting announcement in chat is critically acclaimed author S.T. Gibson. Saint is the author of the bestseller Barnes & Noble Horror Book of the Year, A Dowry of Blood. Setting the success of A Dowry of Blood aside though, we are talking to you today about a new book and series which you've just been picked up by global imprint Angry Robot and set to be published in the summer of 2024. The new tale, Evocation, follows alcoholic psychic David Aristarchov, who must team up with his sorcerer ex-boyfriend Reese and Reese's astrologer wife Moira to be saved from a family curse. A richly imagined novel, Evocation is set in a magic-riddled Boston and filled with smart, cynical, and mysterious characters, which just already sounds like something I need to get my hands on right now.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Oh no, thank you for letting us be a part of this. So, welcome, Saint. Really great to have you here to announce this news about your new book. I touched on the blurb a bit there, but did you want to tell us a bit more about the book and how it came to be? We have heard that you refer to this story as the story of your heart.
Yeah, I do. I think I've definitely said that on social media a couple of times. So, I mean, so much of the story of Evocation is the story of my relationship with the city of Boston. Me and my fiance first visited the city of Boston on our first anniversary, and we fell so in love with it that we decided we wanted to move there. And now we have lived here for 3 going on 4 years.
Wow.
So I am not a Boston native. I am a transplant, but I was just totally taken in by the kind of, I think all cities, big cities, have sort of a unique energy and a city magic to them. And I was really taken in by Boston's, and I fell in love with the different neighborhoods and the different people that I met here. And it also comes from my background in like religion and occultism, and my passion for just learning about all the different ways that human beings try to interact with the divine and kind of enchant their universe and bend fate and all that kind of exciting stuff. So Evocation is the marriage of those two things. It started out as a very short novella that I wrote, baby's first thing she ever published, like first novella. And I had these three characters, Moira, Reese, and David, and kind of a little bit of a haunted house story. And I just loved them so much that I wanted to spend more time with them. And all three of those factors came together to create the series starter, Evocation.
That's so exciting. So, when did you write the novella?
That would have been 5 or 6 years ago. This has been in production for a minute. I've been writing Evocation, working on Evocation for probably 5 years. Not consistently, but pretty at least 6 months out of my year or more would be dedicated to this book as I was working on other things. And it was the book I queried. It was the book that got me my agent. And it ended up just finding a perfect home. And I'm really excited that it's going to see the light of day.
I'm like so excited to talk to you more because what you've just said about like the bending fate, I feel like I spend my life looking for those kind of books and like that kind of feeling. So I
Yeah.
already can't wait to get my hands on it, even though I have to wait a while. So you've just touched on the fact that the story itself is set in Boston, where yourself and your fiance moved to after visiting. Did that have a lot of influence on the story? And what is it that you love about Boston? And does your fondness for the city translate into the book? I've never been, so try and explain it to me.
Boston is a really interesting city. I mean, so much of the history of Boston is swept up in the history of the founding of America, the good, the bad, the ugly. But what I was really taken by, I think, when I moved here was architecturally, there's so many different styles. Like you can be downtown and see like a glass skyscraper and then a brownstone with bay windows and then a gothic or like more like a Victorian house and then something modern, and they're just all kind of smashed up together on these streets. None of the streets are quite straight. Like it's just this really interesting dynamic melding of architecture, and all the neighborhoods have such distinct kind of personalities, which I think is true of any city you spend a lot of time in. But I love spending time in Jamaica Plain, and I live in Brookline, and Fenway has its own personality, and so does Cambridge. And it was really fun to explore all of those different personalities. I think as well, I've previously lived in very homogenous communities, and Boston has such a rich history of different immigrant communities, different ethnic and religious communities. And the more time I spend here and the more I learn about all the different types of communities that have been living here for a long time, the more excited I get about just sharing that in this book. And I think too, we can talk more about this later, but one of my favorite things about the book is that the magic system, all of the magic in it, is based in real world occult or religious practices or magical practices. So, readers can find something to love or something interesting about all the different kinds of characters who approach magic in very different ways. We have people who do ceremonial magic, astrologers, people who practice Santeria, Brujeria, and root work, and all kinds of different traditions that it was really cool to try to just share a little bit of in the book.
I think I want to move to Boston. Were there like any particular spots that were like during the writing process? Did you like get out much? Was there any like particular spots that really influenced you?
Yeah, I tried to visit as many of the spots in the book as I could, and I mean, just little things like the cafes that they go to. I think one of the restaurants is made up, but most of the restaurants and cafes are real places. And all the neighborhoods like I said, they have their own kind of energy. So like there is a nightclub in Alston, which is a really kind of dynamic neighborhood where a lot of students live. And there's like a big Korean neighborhood in Alston, and it's really fun. It's near where I live. And then they go to like an ice cream shop in Brookline, which is where I live. And there's a Botanica in Jamaica Plain. And there's, I believe, the Secret Society meeting places in Cambridge near Harvard, which has a very different energy from, say, Jamaica Plain. And so I really tried to like spend time and go visit friends or go visit museums or coffee shops or nightclubs in all these different locations and try to create something that is my own interpretation of Boston as someone that isn't a native. I didn't grow up here, but is a place I've really come to love. And so there's all kinds of little Easter eggs in the story, and a lot of the places in the story you can go visit, or they're based on a place that, like, if you squint, you're like, oh, it's that nightclub or it's that restaurant,
And what a fun way for like you to explore your new home by like putting it into your book.
Yeah, it was like a game. I would tell my fiance, because we really like to go out and just like explore the city together. Like that's something that's really fun for us. I would be like, well, I'm writing a scene on Newbury Street, so we should go get lunch at Newbury. Or like, I want to put this house in JP, so let's go down to Jamaica Plain and visit our friend who lives there and go walk around her neighborhood and go look at the houses. It was really fun.
That sounds so much fun. And so, as you've just said, there are a lot of magical systems explored in the book. And what is interesting is that they are all based upon real world magical practices, such as astrology and geomancy. Could you tell us a bit more about the magical systems you explore and what made you want to use these as the basis for the magical system in your book?
Yeah. So I obviously am not an expert on every magical system in the book. That would be very difficult to do. And some of them come from traditions that I don't come from. So I really tried to do as much research as possible and talk to as many practitioners as I could to kind of get a sense of like what the ethos of the system was like, what some of the practices were like, and how they differed from one another. But I'm just really intrigued about the fact that a lot of so many different cultures across time and history and space have had, like I said, ways that they try to interact with the ephemeral world and ways that they try to affect change in a supernatural way or interact with the divine, whether it's a religious practice or a strictly magical practice. So oftentimes the two intersect. And I think an important thing to know about me is my background is in religious studies and in theology. I went to grad school to become a priest. That didn't happen.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to become an Episcopal priest, and I studied art and theology when I was at grad school. But I've been a student of religion and of kind of magical practices my entire life. I'm a tarot reader. I'm a practitioner myself. A lot of the people in my life are magical practitioners, and or come from very ritualistic religious traditions that kind of embrace an enchanted worldview. And I wanted to pay homage to that and really come from a place of love and respect in the writing, just to show the vast diversity and the beauty and the depth of all these different practices, and also how they're different. Reese and Moira are one of the main married couples in the story. They're one of the kind of pillar characters of the story, and it's like them and David make up this little triangle. And Reese is a ceremonial magician. He comes from Western esotericism and Western occultism. So think like summoning seals, magical circles, grimoires, like think, Key of Solomon, Aleister Crowley, Golden Dawn, that kind of thing. So very rigid, ritualistic, doing everything by the book. Reese is a very like straight-laced, kind of a little bit uptight person. He's a scholar, he's Catholic, he has to do everything by the book. And then Moira comes from a totally different tradition, and she's much more intuitive, and she flows between a lot of different practices. She's a tarot reader, she's an astrologer, and she comes from a family of magical practitioners who have kind of passed down like West African folk tales and rituals and ways of interpreting astrology that really come from her family and from a really lived experience. So Reese is very by the book, and she's very much like, this is the received knowledge that I've gotten from my family. And, they're kind of opposites in a lot of ways, but they love each other to death. And they're really fun to kind of play off each other. So I think they're a good cross section of the way that different magical practices can intersect. I think the final thing that was so fun to write about this is that if you are into spirituality or occultism or religion, you know that these groups can be very insular and kind of catty, and there's a lot of gossiping. There's a lot of love, there's a lot of community support, but there's a lot of gossip. Everyone's dating everybody. Everybody knows everybody because the communities are so small. Even online communities can get very insular. So it was just so much fun to explore the way that little cliques form and the way relationships form in these communities.
Amazing. This is like so exciting to me because we have like a witchcraft channel in our Discord, and like tarot and manifestation, all that kind of things. They've like really changed my life. So is this something that's like that you've really got into recently? Obviously you were gonna go and be a priest. What made what changed?
No, it's always been an overlap. It's always been two at the same time. I mean, I grew up in a fairly religious household, kind of a evangelical Christian non-denominational, which is basically evangelical in America, Christian household. And I was like very into religion, especially in my teen years, and then kind of circled back around, left evangelicism, and came back through the Episcopalian, more ritualistic, more witchy route when I was older. But I've always really been interested in the supernatural. I've been a tarot reader for 10 years.
Wow.
10 years now? Yeah, a decade. Wow. Reading for myself and friends and clients. And, my personal religious and spiritual practice is very ritualistic. I practice ancestral veneration. I love manifestation. I love a good ritual. I love to know what's going on astrologically. I have people in my life who are much better at the astro than I am. So I'll like text them and be like, okay, Pisces new moon, what do I need to do?
Yes. I just blame everything on the moon.
Yeah, it's Mercury's in retrograde, right? Yeah. But I'm trying to get better at astrology, but there's a lot to learn. And that's what I love so much about spirituality and religion and the occult, is that there's so many traditions, there's so much to learn. There's so many, rich avenues for exploration. And as long as you're being responsible and ethical and you're not trying to insert yourself into closed practices, I think that it's a really enriching kind of study to get into, especially if you're the kind of person whose brain works that way and you kind of have that expanded worldview of the world. And I think she's kind of having a moment. I think spirituality is, a lot of people are exploring what spirituality can look like, both within and outside the confines of traditional religion. And they're not being afraid to say like, yes, I'm Catholic, but I also practice, this, magic that my grandmother taught me, or yeah, I'm Jewish, but part of the Jewish tradition is Kabbalah, and I'm learning more about that. And it's been really cool to just explore that the older I get.
Amazing. So do you have like a daily ritual that you stick to?
A daily ritual, yeah. So I have like I said, over probably the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, I've gotten really into ancestral veneration, which is basically the practice of honoring your ancestors, whether that is direct blood relatives or people that you have kind of a kinship or affinity to, or distant ancestors. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but for me, that looks like having a little altar in my living room. And I'm looking at it right now, and I have out some pictures of family members that have passed. I always keep water out on the altar, sometimes food offerings. And every morning I light incense and often a candle, and I say a prayer of gratitude to my ancestors, thanking them for everything they did to get me here and all of their guidance and love and support, and asking for them to protect me and my family and continue to guide and support me. I also usually do a Hail Mary and an Our Father in the morning. And yeah, that's kind of how I approach my mornings. And I usually remember to do it. Sometimes I sleep in, I have to jump into a meeting and I don't. But I usually remember to do it. And that's been really great. And then, there's also space in my practice for things like ritual, especially during, I observe the Wheel of the Year, a modified version of the Wheel of the Year. So I try to observe like the solstices and work with that energy and work with seasonal energy as much as I can, and remember to kind of expand and then rest as the earth is expanding and resting. That's a little bit about my personal practice, but it's a work in progress and it's been growing, and I'm really excited to see where I'll be in like another 5 years, because there's so much to learn. And it's changed a lot. Like I said, Reese is a ceremonial magician, and I used to want to be a ceremonial magic girly. Like I did a lot of research, I read a lot of books, I tried a lot of different things. Oh, my cat. But yeah, so I've been on a journey. I've tried a lot of different things. I've explored a lot of different paths, and I've just done a lot of different research in that process. So the book was a great opportunity for me to actually use that research and represent those practices.
And like I can imagine those practices probably really helped to keep you grounded, because it must have been quite crazy for a Dowry of Blood to blow up in the way that it did.
Yeah. Yeah, no, A Dowry of Blood was like lightning in a bottle. We published, I worked with a very small press, a UK press called Next Publishing. And we just published this book. Me and my editor worked on it together. We were like a 2-person team, basically. And it started gaining traction. And I was like, okay, cool. People are reading this. This is great. And then Book Talk picked it up.
Yeah.
And that's a juggernaut of a force to be reckoned with.
Definitely.
And then we got the offer from Orbit, who wanted to make it even bigger, and they did this beautiful hardcover. And now we have like, I think 8 foreign editions that are either out or coming out. It's really exciting. So I've just been trying to stay grounded and roll with it. And I firmly believe in celebrating every single milestone and every single win. So that's how I try to approach publishing, because it's such an uncertain industry and there's a lot of waiting and it can be a lot of disappointment. So I just, every time something good happens, I'm like, let's go get dinner, or I'm going to buy myself flowers, or I'm going to put on a face mask or watch a movie, like something that celebrates the accomplishment.
Yeah. Like I genuinely believe that actively practicing gratitude every day is like the most important thing that anyone can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a big journaler, and I always try to approach my journaling from like a posture of like, what am I grateful for? How, in what ways am I blessed? And I do some scripting and stuff like that too, but I think a lot of my journaling is just like, this is what happened today, and I'm so grateful that I get to live this life. And I think that's a really great kind of posture to take.
Oh, it's so amazing to hear. Okay, so we have heard a bit about the characters already from the description of the book. How did you find building the characters for a brand new world and series? I know you said that they've been in your head for a while. Did you imagine your main character and expand out from there?
I think Reese and Moira came first. Again, I wanted to explore this really magical couple that were kind of different in a lot of ways, but loved each other so much, and kind of a little bit of a marriage and trouble story, which I love a marriage and trouble. I love an established relationship that you can kind of really dig your fingers into and kind of make the characters learn more about each other and fall more in love through trials and tribulations. And David was kind of a catalyst force that I brought in almost as an antagonist, as a function of the story. He basically comes into a haunted house and says, "Your marriage is the problem. That's why you're haunted." Yeah, he's a bit of a bulldozer. He's a bit of a he's a lot. He's a bit of a jerk. But I was like, there's more to this character. I'm really interested in this character, and I started spending more time with the character of David, and just like building out more of his backstory, and building out more of what he actually wanted and what his weaknesses were and what were the parts of him that he was hiding from other people. And that's really where Evocation came from. So I said, oh, okay, this is someone who looks like they have it all together. He's hot, he's rich, He's a psychic medium. He's a lawyer. Like, he looks like he has it all together, but he's actually like a person who has a lot of trouble maintaining any kind of meaningful relationship. He's a total workaholic. He's in recovery from alcoholism, a lot of bad coping mechanisms. And I said, what would happen if I pushed this person magically to the breaking point and I made them need other people, and I made him need to be in relationship and to experience love from other people.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where Evocation came from. And then everything else was just like everything I love about Boston, everything I love about magic. I just took everything I love in a little mason jar and shook it up and put it into this book. And the other characters really kind of leapt off the page after that. I kind of used magical philosophies and practices that I wanted to incorporate as kind of a guiding light for these characters. I was like, okay, I really want a character who is studies Barden and has studied the esoteric mysteries of Barden. Okay, we're going to do a character like this. Or I really want a character who is a folk magician, and we're going to do something like that. But it was a lot of fun. There's a gang of like secret society boys who, there's like 5 of them who are like the younger guys in secret society who are in a little clique, and they're always like going out to brunch and gossiping and like,
Oh, wow.
like backbiting each other.
Yeah.
And there's some really awesome, strong women in the book as well.
Excellent.
So it was just a lot of fun to create.
So are you a planner, or do you like channel it as you're writing?
I'm like a headlights writer. So basically what that means is I usually start out with like my first 3 chapters, which are usually pretty clean and very vivid, and I know how I want to start the story. And then I figure out the ending, and I figure out the midpoint and a couple of big, what I call set piece scenes, like big plot elements that I want to include. And from then on, I kind of have to reverse engineer the story and figure out what is everything else that happens in between.
Yeah. Oh, that's quite cool. I don't think I've like heard from anyone else that does that. So already from the blur of the book, we can see that there are queer relationships in the story. Is this a common theme throughout, and how important was it for you to develop and portray those relationships?
It was absolutely an important theme. As a writer, I'm really drawn to exploring friendship, love, sexuality, especially in the lens of queerness, whether that's queer platonic relationships or polyamorous relationships or queer friendships. And I just always keep coming back to those themes because that's part of my lived experience, the lived experience of so many people that I know and love. And I want to really lift up that lived experience and celebrate it and show it in all of its messy, multifaceted glory. And it's funny because I oftentimes as I write and as I delve deeper into the characters, that's when a lot of the befriending or the falling in love happens. So when I started the story, when I started Evocation, I was like, okay, so Reese and David are exes. They kind of had like a toxic relationship in college, and now they kind of are trying to be professional and keep their distance, but they're in the same secret society, and that's complicated. And Reese and Moira are married, and I was like, oh, but there's more here. Like there's a lot here going in every single direction. It's not just Reese and David, it's Moira and David having a really unique and interesting connection. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that they have sort of a psychic connection, which is really unique. And there's like a romantic element to their relationship as well, even though it's not sexual. And they become really good friends. But the joy of writing and the great thing of being a writer is I get to like make the characters squirm to get there. Like you have to do the work, you have to go through the character growth, and you have to grovel a little bit, and you have to make apologies and become a better person in order to earn those strong ironclad connections. So Evocation ends up being a polyamorous B relationship. So it's 3 people who are all connected in different ways, and but they're not all connected in a sexual relationship.
Excellent. And it must be like such an exciting time to be an author, to be able to tell those stories, because that is what people want to read now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. Like we're having this renaissance of queer literature, and people are just so much more open to it. Even 5 years ago when I was writing this, when I was starting it, I was like, okay, a polyamorous relationship is going to be kind of a hard sell. And now, like, there's books being announced every day that are polyamorous, and a lot of my work deals with those themes. Not all. I have a book coming out soon that's monogamous romance. Um, but it's just such an exciting time to be a writer and to be a reader. We're just like spoiled
Definitely.
for good
Yeah.
queer fiction, especially in like science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk to you about the next point because my favorite YA series is the Raven Boys, the Raven Cycle,
Yes.
and like I never meet anybody who like loves it as much as I did. That series had such a chokehold on me, and like after I finished it, I was just not the same.
Oh
I just
yeah.
wanted to go searching for ley lines and finding dead Welsh kings. So I know that series like had a huge effect on you. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
I will always talk about the Raven Cycle. I actually, fun fact, that met my fiance because of the Raven Cycle. We were
No.
in the fandom together, and we were in different countries, and we, had a whirlwind romance and dated long distance and everything, and now we have this very happy life together.
That is
But
amazing.
yeah, so it's very close to my heart because it was so important to me as a writer, and just I think the way that I do relationships in my stories and the way that I approach prose, and also a lot of the ways I approach POV, is very inspired by that series, and by the whole over of that author. So the Raven Cycle is wonderful. Go read it if you haven't read it.
Absolutely.
And I feel like anyone who has read the Raven Cycle will definitely find like a home with these grown-up characters in Evocation, in the whole Summoner Circle series. There's not really Easter eggs to the Raven Cycle, but like certain character archetypes I took and transformed and made my own. But like there's still that little bit of glimmer of like, oh, there's a little bit of Adam and Reese, and there's just
Oh,
like,
that's so exciting.
I think that's the strongest one because I love that, like, I come from humble means, and I'm
Yeah.
so ambitious and I'm so hungry, and I will bring the world to its knees to get what I want, but I also love people, and that's complicated. And I think Adam and Reese have that in common. And just, I feel like the strongest element that carries through both of them is this idea of the world that we live in, even the most mundane things being enchanted. Like magic is in the dirt and in human relationships and in making coffee with your friends and going for a walk and trying to find a ley line. Like magic is right around the corner. And I think that's just the most wonderful thing in the world.
Absolutely. I cannot put into words how excited I am for this book. So that was our last question. Obviously, with the book not set to come out till summer next year, we haven't read it yet, but I can tell already that our community will be very excited for this story, and I'm sure we'll have more questions for you once we've read it. But I think we're in for a little treat now, because as a surprise to everyone, you're going to read us a short excerpt from the book.
I am. I'm going to read some of the first pages. Chapter 1, David. David pulled up to the haunted house 10 minutes before he was expected because arriving late was for amateurs and getting there too early was for interns. He used 3 of those minutes to sit in the Audi and review case notes for an upcoming deposition on his phone. Technically, it wasn't 6 yet, which meant he was technically still on the clock for his day job. Not that he ever really checked out of working as a prosecutor for the city of Boston. He just spent his nights expanding his vocational horizons. He had been juggling full-time work and a thriving private occult practice ever since graduating law school, not to mention weekly secret society meetings, and he would rather donate his entire fortune to charity than walk away from any of it. David was like a diamond, forged under pressure and made entirely of hard, cutting edges. At 2 till, David straightened his collar in the rearview mirror, ran a hand through his wavy bronze hair, and locked up his car. Tonight's client was an eccentric heiress with a penchant for the occult and a recently dead husband, which was right up David's alley. He could be in and out before 8, with time for a workout and an hour or so of answering work emails before bed. It was his ideal type of day, packed to the brim with meaningful, lucrative work and centered entirely around himself. The only thing that could possibly make it better was a round of athletic sex, which was off the table for reasons relating to David's lack of interest in almost all the men in Boston and his ironclad marriage to his work, or a stiff drink, which was off the table for reasons related to David's sanity and general well-being. The widow lived in an ivy-covered Brookline brownstone with black shuttered windows closed tightly to the world. David had to knock 3 times to get an answer, and when the door finally opened, it was only an inch. "Who's there?" a reedy voice from inside demanded. David tried, to no avail, to peer inside the darkness of the house. David Aristarkov, we spoke on the phone. David who? She demanded, obviously either hard of hearing or paranoid or both. David flipped open his wallet and thumbed through the glossy cream business cards the firm had given him until he came to a few embossed black cards hidden in the back. He slipped one free and held it out between his fingertips through the crack in the door. The silver script gleamed like a knife under the bright spring sunlight. Spirit medium and psychic intuitive, it read. I don't know, the woman said after a moment. I've changed my mind. I don't know if my Levi would want me to try and contact him after all this time. Come back tomorrow. We'll see how I feel then. Cold feet then. Typical. There was no way he was cutting his losses and driving back to Fenway now, though, not when he was wired after a long day at the firm and ready, quite literally, to raise the dead. Miriam, David said, every syllable deliberate. His voice had the timbre of smooth, polished brass, without a trace of anything less than all-American. It was a voice curated for conveying utmost surety and bulldozing anyone who got in his way. Why don't you just open the door a little bit, and then you and I can talk about it? There was a long pause, but then the widow obeyed him. People usually did when he asked nicely. It was one of the innate, uncanny abilities that had been with him since childhood, like mediumship or perfect pitch. The door swung open to reveal a wizened but glamorous woman in her 70s, wearing a purple silk headscarf and large tortoiseshell glasses. She took David in appraisingly, flicking her eyes across his wood inlay summer Rolex and monogram cufflinks. He was still dressed for the firm, in his bespoke shirt and slacks that cost more than what most men paid for their wedding suit. The Aristarkovs had money so old you could have exhibited it in the Hermitage, vodka exporting, fur trapping, wartime advising money, champagne in the box seat money, discreet exit from the public eye when wealth became unfashionable money. David had never been interested in denying himself any of the comforts his inheritance provided. I just don't know if I'm ready to talk to him again, is all, she said, a little quieter. David gallantly took her small hand between his own, pressing gently. He was better with the dead than he was with the living, but he could feel the apprehension wafting off her like a perfume gone sour. Best to lay on the charm a little bit to put her fears at rest. That's what I'm here for. You wouldn't have called me if we weren't meant to do this together. It'll be wonderful, I promise. Now, why don't you invite me inside? She nodded absently and stepped aside, muttering something about being willing to try anything once. Entry secured, David dropped his pleasantries at the door and strode past her into the house. She stared at him as though baffled at how quickly she had let down her defenses, and David simply gave her a wry smile over his shoulder. It was whispered that a long time ago, before Martin Luther had even written his treatise and plunged Europe into a holy war, an Aristarkov made a deal with the devil. 1,000 years of servitude for an apprenticeship in the art of persuasion, with a crash course in the occult arts thrown in to sweeten the pot. It was difficult to say whether there was any truth to the claim, but it was true that David's grandfather had been gifted entire stables of thoroughbred horses simply by asking for them, and that his father stole his prima ballerina mother away from her debut in Giselle by draping her in his coat and telling her that a car was waiting outside. David rolled up his sleeves, revealing the thickly inked Manus Hieroglyphica tattooed on the inside of his right arm. It was a sigil meant to represent the principles of alchemy distilled into universal power. David had gotten it when he was young and drunk on his own invincibility, but of all the occult symbols he could have chosen to get marked on him forever, it wasn't the worst option. He spread his fingers, testing the aura, air pressure, and electrical currents of the room. The familiar cold malaise of dead energy curled around his fingers, lighting up the psychic intuition at the back of his brain. His whole body relaxed into the sensation, comforted by the familiarity of restless ghosts. I'm going to need a quiet room to work in and an object that belonged to your late husband, David said, and a sparkling water, if you have one. David Aristarkov didn't believe in the devil, but he was certainly willing to work with everything his birthright had given him. There you go.
Wow. Okay, David is already like one of the most interesting characters that I've come across in ages.
Oh, thank you.
I'm hooked already. How exciting. I bet you just
It's
can't
so
wait to
exciting.
like share him with people now.
Woo, it's been so long. I'm so ready.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Thank you for treating us to a sneak peek. So thanks everyone for listening, and thank you again to Saint for joining us today and letting us be a part of this. I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future. We'd also like to thank Angry Robot for giving us at Fantasy Fellowship the opportunity to reveal this on announcement day. How exciting! If you would like to talk more about books with like-minded individuals or talk witchcraft, because we do a lot of that, as well as keep up to date with more news and events, then you can join our community Discord with the link below. You can also find us on Instagram, where we are at fantasy_fellowship, Twitter, where we are at fan fellowship. We have a website, www.fantasy-fellowship.co.uk. If you would like to support Fantasy Fellowship to bring you more content and giveaways, then you can find our Ko-Fi page linked in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit like and keep up to date with more Fantasy Fellowship videos. Hit the subscribe button. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Sane. It's honestly been so much fun talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.